Howdy, men. Decided to do some shooting outside this time. Got a horse over here, hay behind us. Anyhow, today I want to talk about reasoning, what I called principled reasoning or inside-out reasoning. This is important because we're often getting in engagements, discussions with people, and many times we're a little frustrated at why we're not able to make our point or how that they can distract us from the main point. And so I just want to give you a tool and then an opportunity to practice this. You'll have an opportunity to practice this with giving me some examples in your video, in your writing, of how you would counter different types of what we call outside-in reasoning, the type that they use to take us off our point. Inside-out reasoning, or principled reasoning, goes like this. When we're talking about abortion, we know it's wrong to take an innocent life. That's the principle. That principle, if it's truly a principle, a basic principle, a law, then it cannot be violated. So we know this. Well, oftentimes, that isn't enough for those who we're discussing this with. They're trying to pull us off target by saying, but what if a girl is raped? And we're tempted, they say something like this, you know, don't you think it's cruel to have her have this child? And you're kind of going, you're reasonable people, you're compassionate, and so you're going, yeah, I see the trouble in that, you know, her having to relive this when she looks at the child, and so the argument goes. And so we're tempted to compromise on this issue. The other day, a friend of mine had a discussion with a guy, and it went kind of like this. We're discussing salvation, and the guy was using outside-in thinking to violate the principle. The principle was, how do we get saved? And this guy was building a false narrative saying, well, what about the guy on his deathbed? What do you say to him? Well, we tell him the same story. Now, just because he bows his head and he weeps and he cries doesn't mean he's going to heaven. It could mean he's just very concerned about his future. But it doesn't change the principle. He's trying to say, well, if that guy can get saved through a prayer, then what about us? The fact is, everyone comes through the same gate of Jesus. They've come to repent and say they're wrong, and they move forward on a new life. For the guy who's just trying to do it on his deathbed, you know, only God knows at that point. For the rest of us, we're taking the gospel, we're using the gospel, it's being expressed in our life all the time, and so we're gaining a great confidence that we're walking with Christ, and others can see the same thing. So you can see this is another example where someone tries to build a principle around an exception to violate this law that God has established. You and I don't have the right to violate this principle. That isn't given to us. We only know the principle. You should not take the life of someone who's innocent. When you understand that they're pulling you off by taking some obscure point, some if, some maybe, and they're trying to develop their principle based on the exception to the rule instead of the rule itself. They're trying to develop their principle around an exception. When they find the exception, they're saying, well, since you allow someone who's been raped to have an abortion, what stops everyone from having an abortion for whatever convenience or whatever reason? And that's how they use this. The key to is identify the principle, and then in the discussion understand how they're trying to use some exception as building their principle to violate this law. So what I want you to do is grab your own examples. Grab a principle, a law that you cannot violate, and then make an exception to that and show how this exception is not able, you're not able to use that to violate the principle. This is very important, and you need to practice getting used to seeing where people are violating the principle by creating some false narrative that they use to destroy the principle and get you to push you back on the principle that you know to be true. Thank you for listening. Jesus to the people.